When Hurricane Maria hit, the devastation was unimaginable. The storm itself was bad, but the aftermath, that was the real horror. Whole towns were swallowed by the floodwaters, lives swept away in the chaos. I was sitting at home in Texas when the images started flooding the news. Rooftops barely poking out of the water, people stranded on their cars, and others wading chest-deep in the murky, debris-filled rivers that used to be streets. I couldn't just sit there and watch anymore. I'm no hero, but I have some experience as an EMT, and I've done search and rescue in the past. So when I heard they were looking for volunteers to help with the cleanup, I signed up. I didn't think twice. I thought I'd be rescuing people, maybe bringing supplies to survivors, offering medical care. I didn't realize that my job would be recovering the bodies. When I got to the small town they'd assigned me to, it was like stepping into a post-apocalyptic nightmare. The place had been hit hard. Houses were flooded halfway up their walls, cars were overturned, and a thick layer of muck covered everything. The smell was the first thing that hit me. It was a damp, earthy scent mixed with something much worse, something sour and rotten that clung to the back of my throat. We were given these huge black rubber boots to wade through the water, and a basic mask to help block out the smell, but trust me, it didn't do much. And there were only a few of us, all volunteers like me. Regular people, not professionals. They didn't send enough of those. Our job was simple: go house to house. If we found someone who hadn't made it, we'd mark the house with spray paint and radio it in. Sounds easy, right? Yeah, it wasn't. The first couple of houses were empty. I remember feeling weirdly relieved. The stench was unbearable, but we didn't find anything worse than waterlogged furniture and mud up to our knees. After the first hour or so, it started feeling routine, almost numb. But then we reached the house. It was a small, one-story place, tucked away at the edge of the neighborhood. It looked like any of the others. Windows shattered, the door slightly ajar, watermarks streaked across the walls. But there was something about it that made me pause before going inside. I couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the way the house seemed darker than the others, or the way the air seemed to get colder as we approached it. My partner for the day, James, was already heading in, and I followed, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. The first room we entered was what used to be a living room, now trashed and half submerged in water. Furniture was overturned, mold growing on the walls, and the smell was worse than any of the houses we'd been in. It was the smell of rot, thick and overpowering. I could taste it. My stomach turned, and I had to stop myself from gagging. "Let's check the back rooms," James said, his voice muffled through his mask. His eyes were wide, and I could tell he was just as unnerved as I was. We sloshed through the water, moving down a narrow hallway. The deeper we went, the worse the stench became. There was a bedroom door at the end of the hall. It was closed but not fully latched. Water trickled out from under it. James pushed the door open. Inside there was a bed, half sunken in the water, and sprawled across it, face down, was a man. His skin was bloated, gray, and his clothes clung to him like a second layer of skin. The water had risen just enough that his body floated slightly, swaying gently as we stood there, frozen. James stepped back, muttering something under his breath, and I felt my chest tighten. I had seen bodies before, car accidents, shootings, all sorts of ugly ways for people to die. But this was different. There was something wrong about this one. I don't know how to describe it. Maybe it was the way his body seemed to linger there, suspended in that filthy water. Or maybe it was his face turned slightly to the side, just enough that we could see one eye staring back at us. Even through the mask, I could smell the death. That sickly sweet odor that clings to everything, that seeps into your clothes and skin. James shook his head, signaling for me to grab the spray can. We marked the door with an X, noting the body inside, and moved on. But the image of that man stuck with me for the rest of the day. I couldn't shake it. By the time we reached the next house, the sun was starting to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows across the flooded street. This house was bigger, 2 stories, and more damaged than the others. The windows were all broken, and the front door hung off its hinges. We waited inside, water sloshing around our ankles. The smell wasn't as bad as the last house, but there was something else in the air. Something I couldn't quite place. It smelled damp, yes, but it was mixed with something metallic, almost like copper. We started our sweep through the first floor. Nothing out of the ordinary. Broken furniture, waterlogged walls, a few family photos lying face down in the water. I picked one up out of curiosity. A mother, father, and 2 kids all smiling at the camera. I wondered where they were now. Had they gotten out in time? Or were we about to find them somewhere in the house? James called out from upstairs. "I think I found something. You better come look at this." I climbed the stairs, the wood creaking under my boots. When I reached the top, I could feel it again. That chill, that heavy feeling in the air. It was almost suffocating. James was standing in the doorway of what looked like a child's bedroom. He didn't say anything, just nodded for me to look inside. My stomach dropped. In the corner of the room was a crib, and inside, floating in the water, was a tiny, bloated body. I couldn't even tell if it had been a boy or a girl. It was just there, its small arms and legs twisted at odd angles, its skin pale and swollen. I had to look away. After we marked the house, I stepped outside for some air, but the weight of what we'd seen inside lingered like a dark cloud over us. James didn't speak much as we moved on to the next house, and honestly, I didn't blame him. What do you even say after that? The next house was in even worse shape. Part of the roof had collapsed, and there was debris scattered all over the yard. As we stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was how much darker it was inside, despite the sun still being up. It felt like we were walking into a cave, the light dimming the further in we went. The smell hit me next, that same sickly sweet stench, but stronger this time. And as we moved further into the house, I started to see things, strange things. There were symbols carved into the walls, not random graffiti, but deliberate, intricate symbols. Circles with lines intersecting through them, strange shapes I didn't recognize. Some of them were drawn in what looked like dried blood. "Do you see this?" I asked James, pointing to one of the symbols. He nodded, his face pale. "Yeah, I don't like this. Let's get out of here." We hadn't even checked the rest of the house yet, but I didn't care. Something about those symbols made my skin crawl, made the air feel heavy and thick. We turned to leave, but as we reached the front door, we heard it. A noise from upstairs. A faint shuffling sound, like something or someone moving. James and I froze. I looked at him, and he looked at me, both of us trying to decide whether to check it out or just leave. We should have left, but something made us stay. Curiosity, fear, I don't know. "Maybe an animal?" James suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. We slowly made our way upstairs, each step heavier than the last. The air felt even colder up there, and the smell, God, the smell was so thick I could hardly breathe. When we reached the landing, we saw it. There, at the end of the hall, was another door, slightly ajar. Light filtered through the crack, casting a long shadow on the floor. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I couldn't turn back now. I pushed the door open. The room was empty, but the smell, it was coming from here. It was overwhelming, filling every corner of the space. And on the floor, in the center of the room, was a pile of bones. Small bones, animal bones maybe, but they were arranged in a pattern, like some kind of ritual. And then, just as we were about to turn and leave, we heard it, a whisper. At first, it was faint, just a soft murmur, like someone speaking in another room. I thought maybe it was the wind, or water dripping from the ceiling. But as we stood there, the whisper grew louder. It wasn't coming from outside or down the hall. It was coming from inside the room. James and I locked eyes, neither of us wanting to say what we both knew. Something was in here with us. "I don't see anyone," James whispered, backing toward the door. "We need to go." As soon as he said it, the whispering stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Then, without warning, the door slammed shut. I jumped, spinning around just in time to see James grab the handle, yanking at it. "It's stuck," he said, panic rising in his voice. "It won't open." I ran over, helping him pull on the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was like something was holding it shut from the other side. That's when the whispering started again. Louder this time, more urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like chanting. The room felt like it was closing in on us, the walls pressing in, the air thick with the stench of rot and death. "We need to break it down," I said, grabbing a piece of wood from the floor. "Help me." Together we rammed the door once, twice, until finally it splintered and burst open. We stumbled out into the hall, gasping for air. The chanting had stopped, but the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight, stayed with us as we bolted down the stairs and out of the house. That night, back at the makeshift camp where the volunteers were staying, I couldn't sleep. James and I didn't talk much after what had happened, but I could see it in his face. He was just as shaken as I was. I lay there staring up at the ceiling, trying to block out the images of the day. The bodies, the symbols, the whispers. I couldn't stop replaying them in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man's bloated face staring up at me from the water. I heard the babies cry, even though it was impossible. And I heard the whispers. I tried to tell myself it was just the stress, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but deep down I knew. Whatever was in that house, it had followed me. It wasn't done with me. I still hear the whispers sometimes. In the quiet moments when I'm alone, they're faint, but they're there. And I can't help but feel like one day they'll come for me.